All right, so we're diving into these awesome English speaking tips. And guess what? We're going to use storytelling to help you guys get there. I've been really digging through all these tips, and some of them are so cool. Did you know that simply narrating your day, even just making breakfast or walking the dog, can make a huge difference? There's this story about Jane, who was super shy about speaking, but she started doing that, just narrating her day, and her fluency just took off.
You know, it's funny. We often underestimate how powerful just those everyday activities can be. For language learning, it's all about creating a consistent habit of thinking and speaking in English.
Yeah. I used to struggle with this whole think in English thing. I'd be translating everything in my head before I could even say a word. It was exhausting. And my conversations just felt so clunky. What are some ways to actually shift your thinking into English mode?
Well, that's a common challenge. One really effective technique is to start small. So instead of trying to translate entire sentences, just focus on single words or short phrases. For example, when you see a cat, just think cat in English, not your native language. And then as you get more comfortable, gradually increase the complexity. Another helpful tip is to use visual aids. So surround yourself with English labels, posters, even sticky notes. This constant visual reminder will kind of just nudge your brain to start thinking in English.
So it's like training your brain to make those automatic connections, right? Instead of going through that extra translation step.
Exactly. And speaking of training, the source material really emphasizes the importance of daily practice, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. The key is consistency. Think of it like working out a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
And this story about Raj totally proves your point. He was really focused on improving his pronunciation. So he started imitating the dialogue from his favorite movies, paying attention to the actor's intonation and everything. And guess what? It totally worked. He started to sound so much more natural and fluent.
You know what Raj was doing was actually quite clever. He was intuitively tapping into the power of mimicry, which is a fundamental aspect of language acquisition.
Yeah.
When we imitate native speakers, we're not just copying sounds, we're absorbing the subtle nuances of the language, the rhythm, the stress patterns, even the emotional tone.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's like when we learn our first language as babies, we're constantly mimicking what we hear around us. So why not apply that same principle to learning English?
Exactly. And this leads us to another crucial point that's emphasized in the source material: learning phrases, not just isolated words.
Okay, this is something I've heard before, but honestly, I never fully understood why it was so important. Can you explain a bit more about the benefits of learning phrases instead of just memorizing individual words?
Sure. So when we learn phrases, we're not just acquiring vocabulary, we're also grasping how words work together. In natural flowing speech, for example, instead of just learning the words give and hand, we learn the phrase, could you give me a hand? This teaches us the grammatical structure, the idiomatic usage, and the natural rhythm of the language.
Oh, so those common phrases become building blocks for conversations. It's much more efficient than trying to piece together individual words in the moment.
Exactly. Imagine trying to build a house brick by brick versus using prefabricated walls. Phrases are those prefabricated walls of language. They help you communicate more fluently and naturally. The source even gives some great examples, like what's up or how's it going?
I never thought of it that way. That's actually a really helpful analogy. So instead of getting bogged down with individual words, we should focus on those everyday phrases and how they're used in context. That's a fantastic takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the beauty of it is you encounter these phrases all the time. In movies.
Yeah.
Music. And everyday conversations. Start paying attention to them. Write them down. And practice using them in your own interactions.
Yeah. I love that. All right, so we've talked about the importance of thinking in English, practicing consistently, and learning phrases. But let's get even more practical. This source has a whole section on using stories to improve fluency. And I have to admit, I was a little skeptical at first, but then they started talking about visualizing the story and really bringing it to life with details. And it clicked for me. I actually tried it with the sample story they gave about a weekend hike. And it was amazing. I felt like I was reliving the experience as I was telling the story in English. Do you find that using your senses helps you remember things better when you're learning a language?
Absolutely. Our brains are wired to remember things that are emotionally charged and sensory rich. So when you actively engage your senses while you're telling a story in English, like the sights, sounds, smells, you're creating those stronger neural connections, making it much easier to recall the vocabulary and the grammar. It's like turning your brain into a high-definition movie studio.
I love that analogy. It makes so much sense. And speaking of making things stick, this source also recommends recording yourself speaking English. Oh, I used to cringe when I would listen back to my early recordings. But it really helped me pinpoint areas where I needed to improve. It was like having a personal language coach in my pocket.
Yeah, such a valuable tool
Yeah.
for self-assessment. You can hear your pronunciation, your intonation, the overall flow of your speech. You might notice things you weren't even aware of, like maybe using filler words too often or speaking too
Oh,
quickly.
totally. I used to say and like all the time. But hearing it back on a recording made me so much more conscious of it. And over time, I was able to break those habits.
Exactly. It's all about becoming aware of
Yeah.
your own speech patterns and then making those conscious efforts to improve.
Yeah, for sure. You know, another thing that really stood out to me in these tips was the power of asking questions. It seems so simple,
Yeah.
but it's such an effective way to keep conversations flowing and build your confidence.
Asking questions not only demonstrates your engagement, but it also encourages the other person to share their thoughts and experiences. It kind of takes the pressure off of you to constantly come up with things to say, and it creates a more dynamic and engaging interaction.
Right. And they suggest using those open-ended questions like, what do you think about? Or
Yeah.
how is your seat? Which is a great tip. Those kinds of questions invite more detailed responses and give you more opportunities to listen and learn.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. If you don't understand something, native speakers are usually happy to explain or rephrase things. It shows that you're actively listening and you're eager to learn.
Absolutely. It's all about showing genuine interest and engaging with the conversation. Okay, one last tip from this section that I found really intriguing: expanding your vocabulary with context.
Yeah, learning new words in isolation can be a bit like trying to memorize a phone book. It's dry and it's difficult to retain. But when you encounter words in context, within sentences and stories, they come alive. They suddenly have meaning and purpose.
Yeah, they give the example of the word serene used in the sentence. The lake was serene, surrounded by mountains. And it's so true. You can instantly picture the scene and understand the feeling the word is trying to convey.
Exactly. The sentence provides clues to the meaning of the word serene. You can infer that it describes a peaceful, calm, and tranquil atmosphere. And that visual imagery helps cement the word in your memory.
Okay, so I've always kind of found the idea of role-playing a bit intimidating, but this source makes a really compelling case for it. They say it's like a dress rehearsal for real-life conversations, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like a safe space to experiment, make mistakes, and build your confidence. Think about those situations where you might feel a little nervous using English, like ordering food, asking for directions, making a phone call. Role-play those scenarios can really help you feel more prepared and less anxious when you actually encounter them in real life.
Right. They even provide this example scenario of ordering at a cafe. Want to give it a try?
Sure.
Okay, so imagine I'm the customer and you're the barista. Okay, I'm feeling brave. I'm going to go for it. Hi there. I'd love to try one of your lattes. What would you recommend?
Okay, welcome to our cafe. We have a variety of delicious lattes. Do you prefer something sweet, or are you looking for more of a classic flavor?
I'm feeling adventurous today. What's your most unique latte?
Let's see. Our lavender honey latte is a customer favorite. It's a beautiful balance of floral and sweet notes.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'll have that, please.
Excellent choice. One lavender honey latte coming right up.
See?
Yeah.
That wasn't so bad. I actually felt pretty comfortable using those phrases and responding in real time.
Yeah. And the more you practice, the more natural it'll become. You can even involve friends or family members in your role plays to make it even more fun and interactive.
That's a great idea. It kind of turns language practice into a game almost. Okay, so the source also talks about the benefits of joining English-speaking communities. And they share this really cool story about Ahmed, who joined an English-speaking book club. Not only did his speaking improve, but he also made new friends and expanded his cultural horizons.
Yeah. Ahmed's story really highlights the social and emotional benefits of language learning. It's not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and broadening your perspectives.
It's about finding your tribe, those people who share your passion for the language and can support you on your learning journey.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is there are so many different types of communities out there, like book clubs, hiking groups, online forums, language exchange partners.
So think about your interests, your hobbies, your goals. What kind of community would you feel most comfortable in, most engaged in?
Yeah, the key is to find a space where you can use English authentically and connect with people who share your passions.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into these incredible English speaking tips. I have to say, I've learned so much from going through all these sources with you.
It's been a pleasure exploring these techniques together. Remember, the most important thing is to enjoy the process, embrace the challenges, celebrate those victories, and never stop exploring the beautiful world of language.
Yes. And for all of you listening out there, remember that fluency comes one step at a time. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Until next time, happy speaking.
Hey everyone, and welcome. You know how sometimes you wish you could just switch between formal and informal English? Like it's nothing?
Like having a secret code, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today. We've got this awesome cheat sheet all about formal versus informal English, and we're going to break it down.
It's like a superpower, choosing the right words for every situation.
Totally. I mean, imagine going to a job interview and accidentally slipping into super casual slang.
Or using like Shakespearean English when you're just texting your friend.
Oh, been there.
Right.
Not a good look.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. This cheat sheet starts with the core definitions of formal and informal English. And it's really cool how it explains why each style matters.
Yeah, like formal English is all about clarity, respect, sounding professional.
Right. While informal English is warmer, more about connecting with people, showing your personality.
It's fascinating how each style creates a different effect. Like formal language, it's all about being clear and direct, especially when you need to sound authoritative or like an expert. You see it in legal documents, research papers, that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
But in formal language, that's how we build relationships. Express yourself naturally. Think about how you talk to your family or close friends.
So true. It's like having a whole linguistic toolbox. You choose the right tool for the job. Now, this cheat sheet has this awesome table of word pairs that really show the difference between formal and informal English.
Oh, yeah. Those are great examples.
There are a few that just jump out at me, like purchase versus buy. I mean, they basically mean the same thing, but purchase always feels so much more serious.
Yeah, purchase definitely has that heavier, more transactional feel to it. You wouldn't say, I'm going to purchase a candy bar at the store, right?
Definitely not.
But you would say, the company is considering the purchase of a new building. It's like purchase is reserved for bigger, more official things.
Interesting. So it's about using the right word for the situation. And speaking of, another word pair I wanted to ask about is obtain versus get. They both mean to acquire something, but obtain just sounds like you had to work so much harder.
You're right on. Obtain implies effort, and often there's a more formal process involved. Like you wouldn't say, I got my degree after years of study. It doesn't have the same impact.
Right.
You'd say, I obtained my degree. It emphasizes the accomplishment, the effort you put in.
Totally changes the feeling. Okay, I'm starting to see how these small word choices can really change how your message comes across. Now let's jump into some real-life scenarios this cheat sheet covers, like job interviews, texting, and social media.
Ooh, yeah. Those are where things can get tricky.
It's like navigating a linguistic minefield. Let's start with job interviews. They're already nerve-wracking enough. What's the biggest language mistake you've seen people make in those situations?
It's not always about using the wrong word. It's more about the overall tone and being aware of the context. I once had this candidate who kept using slang and informal expressions throughout the whole interview.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it wasn't that they were trying to be disrespectful or anything, but it created this disconnect. It made it harder to assess their professionalism. How they would fit into the company culture.
I get it. It's like showing up to a fancy dinner party in, like, sweatpants. It's not that sweatpants are bad. They're just not right for the occasion.
Exactly.
So from your experience, what are some key tips for hitting that sweet spot? Being professional, but still sounding natural in a job interview.
Well, clarity and conciseness are always good things to keep in mind. Like instead of saying, I endeavored to ameliorate the situation,
Right.
You could simply say, I worked to improve the situation. It gets the point across without being too complicated.
So it's about being impressive without being confusing.
Exactly. And don't forget about your nonverbal communication too. Body language, tone of voice, those all play a part.
True. It's all about sending the right signals. All right, let's move on to something you mentioned earlier. Texting. I know you're super busy. Do you ever find yourself overthinking your texts? Especially when it comes to slang or abbreviations.
Oh, all the time. Texting is naturally informal, but there's still a spectrum there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll type something out and then think, wait, is this too casual? Or will they even understand this abbreviation?
Me too. Like, should I use lel or actually type out, that's funny? It's a real dilemma.
Right. So how do you figure out where the line is, especially when you're texting someone new?
Right.
I think it comes down to, like, reading the room, even if it's a virtual room. Pay attention to how the other person is texting. Are they using lots of slang, emojis?
Yeah.
Then you can probably loosen up a bit too, but if they're more reserved, it's better to be a little more careful, at least at first.
So it's a bit of a dance, like you said before, mirroring and adapting. That's really helpful. Okay, but what about social media? That feels like a whole different beast. You're potentially talking to tons of people at once.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the formal-informal balance there?
Social media is interesting because it often blends different levels of formality. You might be commenting on a friend's silly post 1 minute and then having a serious discussion in a professional group the next.
Right.
It's like having multiple conversations happening at the same time.
I never thought about it that way. So it's even more important to think about your audience and the purpose of your message.
For sure. Think about who you're trying to reach and what you want to achieve with your post or comment. Are you sharing a personal story, offering professional insights, or just messing around? That'll help you decide how formal to be.
Makes sense. Okay, we've talked about all these specific situations, but I'm curious. Have you ever come across a situation where the line between formal and informal was just totally blurred? Like you had no idea which style to use?
Oh, absolutely. It happens more often than you'd think. One that comes to mind is online forums, those communities where people from all walks of life come together. You might have someone using super technical jargon in one comment, and then someone else responds with a meme.
Oh, wow, a real mix.
It's a linguistic melting pot.
Sounds kind of overwhelming. So how do you even approach a situation like that?
I think the key is to be adaptable and focus on being clear. Even if you don't understand every single word or reference, try to get the main idea and respond in a way that's clear, respectful, and relevant to the topic. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you need it.
Great advice. So it's all about being flexible and open to learning. Okay, I'm feeling way more confident about handling these tricky situations now. But before we jump into the next part of your cheat sheet, let's take a quick breather and recap what we've covered so far. We started by defining formal and informal English, those two distinct styles. Then we dug into those tricky word pairs, like purchase versus buy, and saw how those subtle choices can really change your message. And we even tackled those real-life communication minefields, like job interviews, texting, and social media. We learned how to find that balance between being professional and being ourselves.
And the big takeaway is that language is constantly changing, right? So we got to be willing to adapt and learn as we go.
Love that perspective. It's not about always getting it right. It's about being aware, adaptable, and enjoying the ride. And speaking of enjoying the ride, let's buckle up and get ready to explore the fascinating world of how language evolves in the next part of our deep dive. Things are about to get even more interesting.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we got sidetracked with all those real-life scenarios, we were talking about how language is always evolving. I mean, think about how much English has changed even in the last few years. All those new slang terms, all those online expressions.
It's crazy, right? I feel like I need a dictionary just to keep up with my younger cousin sometimes. It's like they're speaking a whole new language. But seriously, how does all this change affect the whole formal versus informal thing? Is formal English becoming like a dinosaur?
That's a really interesting question, and it's actually something that linguists are studying right now. Formal English definitely still has its place. Think about academia, law, government. Those are places where it's still really important.
Right, for official stuff.
Exactly. But it's not immune to change. Even something like email. Think how we used email 10 or 15 years ago. It was always so formal.
Well, you're super serious.
But these days, it's much more common to use relaxed language, especially with colleagues or clients you know well.
I definitely do that. I'm way more comfortable using contractions and even emojis in work emails now. Just depends who I'm emailing, of course.
Right. It's about finding that balance, being professional, but also building relationships.
Totally. And that's where things get really interesting, right? The lines are blurring in a lot of contexts.
Yeah. Like social media is a perfect example, especially LinkedIn. You've got this mix of professional networking and more casual interaction. You might have a CEO posting this super insightful article, and then the next minute they're sharing a funny story about their weekend.
It's true. It's like a whole new world of communication. So are you saying we need to become like linguistic chameleons, constantly adapting to each platform and audience.
Well, it can feel like that sometimes, right? But I think the key is to be aware of what's going on, what the different expectations are. We don't have to abandon all the rules of formal English, but we can also be flexible and creative with informal language.
That reminds me of the practice exercises you included in the cheat sheet.
Oh,
They're not just about memorizing rules. They're about trying different styles, finding your own voice.
exactly. Like there's one where you rewrite a formal email in a more casual way, and then the other way around. It really gets you thinking.
It's like a workout for your language skills.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that language is a tool, and just like any tool, we need to know how to use it for different purposes.
I love that analogy, and that's one of the most important things to remember. Language is a tool. Just like a carpenter wouldn't use a hammer for every job, we need different linguistic tools for different situations.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I can handle anything. But this whole idea of language evolving, it makes me wonder, what does this mean for the future of communication? Are we all going to end up just talking in emojis and internet slang?
That's a really fascinating question, and honestly, I don't think anyone knows for sure. There are some linguists who think we're moving towards a more informal, global style of communication, where things like grammar and formality become less important. Others think there will always be a need for clear, precise language, especially in professional and academic settings.
Right, it makes sense.
And then there are those who believe that technology, like AI, will play a huge role in shaping how we communicate in the future. Think about voice assistants like Siri and Alexa. They could potentially change the way we speak and write.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. So many possibilities. I can't even imagine what English will be like 50 or 100 years from now.
Me neither. But it's exciting to think we're all part of this evolution, right? Contributing our own words, phrases, ways of speaking.
Totally. Maybe someday my younger cousins will be teaching me the latest slang. Who knows? But for now, I feel way more equipped to handle the way things are now. We've covered so much formal and informal English, word choices, those tricky real-life situations.
Yeah, and we've learned that language is always changing, so it's a journey, really. Always something new to learn.
And speaking of journeys, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to share some final thoughts and inspiration before wrapping up this deep dive. All right, we're back. I hope you had a chance to really think about how you can use all these formal and informal English skills in your own life. It's kind of like we've given you this treasure map, right? But now it's up to you to go out and explore.
I like that, a treasure map. And just like any explorer, you're going to run into some unexpected things, maybe a few challenges, but also some amazing discoveries.
For sure. Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive into formal versus informal English, let's do a quick recap. We started by defining those two styles, formal being all about authority and respect, and informal being more about connecting with people, letting your personality shine through. We even looked at those tricky word pairs like purchase versus buy and obtain versus get.
Yeah, the subtle differences can really make a big impact.
And we talked about all those everyday situations that can be tricky. Job interviews, texting, social media. We figured out how to strike that balance between being professional and being authentic.
It's like having a secret code for communication.
Totally. But honestly, the most fascinating part for me was realizing that language is never really finished. It's always changing, so we have to be ready to adapt.
It's true. The way we communicate today is totally different from even a few decades ago, and who knows what it'll be like in the future.
That's what makes it so exciting. But it also makes you wonder, right, what about the future of language? I mean, we talked about social media and technology, but what about AI? Do you think things like Siri and Alexa will change how we use formal and informal English?
That's a great question. Will we all start speaking in these perfectly grammatical sentences? Or will that casual conversational style from texting become even more common? It's really hard to say.
I know, right? That's kind of mind-blowing. It makes you realize how powerful language is.
Absolutely. It's something we often take for granted, but it shapes how we think, how we interact, how we see the world.
So true. Well, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this thought. Whether you're using formal or informal English, the most important thing is to communicate clearly and respectfully, and to let your own unique voice come through.
That's a great way to put it. Don't be afraid to experiment, try new things, make mistakes. That's how we all learn and grow.
Exactly. And remember, language is constantly evolving, so enjoy the journey. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.